Welcome to the Capitol News. I am your host, Alex Caritas. Today is May 29th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. So, Bob Mueller speaks. He speaks publicly for the first time, and if he gets his way, it will be the only time he makes comments to the public, or even Congress for that matter. Of course, Congress has the ability to subpoena Bob Mueller, but that remains up in the air. So, not much new was learned, I think, from Bob Mueller's statement this morning. It was very brief. Part of it was even thanking, of course, his team, whom he worked with for 22 months while the investigation was underway. So you're talking about a statement that was really less than 10 minutes long, trying to summarize those 2 volumes of work that have been disseminated to the American people and to Congress, and has obviously caused a political storm, a political nightmare for the president and his administration. Doesn't mean he's above the law, but we know some of the funny business that has been taking place with this whole genesis of the Bob Mueller investigation. So a few things that I want to highlight here in regards to what Bob Mueller said. He said charging the president with a crime was not an option. This is from the get-go, and this is what he is referring to is a Department of Justice, a DOJ guideline that has been in place for a significant period of time. So from the get-go, Bob Mueller and his investigative team knew this. They were bound by this. This was not going to be changed by the Department of Justice. This was not going to be changed by Bob Mueller and his team. So they were bound by this DOJ guideline. So charging the president with a crime was not an option from the outset. Nevertheless, the whole purpose of this investigation was not first and foremost to see if the president, his campaign, or any member thereof colluded or conspired with the Russians. This whole thing was kick-started because we were supposed to understand if and how the Russians interfered with our election. Now, he made comments to that effect, saying that they did, and he stated them as he did in his report. So there was nothing new stated here by Bob Mueller. Now, there were other comments that I'm going to get to here shortly, but I do want to make sure that we pay attention to some of the most important ones because, by and large, there was nothing different from what Bob Mueller said compared to what Attorney General Bill Barr said. Now, of course, you're going to have talking heads who are opposed to Trump. You're going to have the mainstream media who do not care for the president, who are going to spin this in a way that says, well, these are 2 different things. AG Barr said one thing, and Special Prosecutor Bob Mueller said another. That's not the case. It's not the case. And we're going to get to that. Another thing that Bob Mueller said was he's not taking questions. This is it. If he should testify, he won't add anything further. He will not field hypothetical questions, which, of course, would be the whole exercise. This would be a 3-ring circus if Bob Mueller went to the Capitol Hill to testify, because you can bet your bottom dollar that the House Democrats would most definitely ask a whole bunch of hypotheticals beyond the scope of the investigation. And Bob Mueller said, I am not going to be fielding any type of hypothetical. He does not want to go before Congress. Now, Congress has the power to subpoena, so we'll see what happens there. That's going to be a political storm in and of itself, quite potentially. But he says the report is my testimony. And that's accurate. That's exactly how he should be putting it. There's no other reason for him to say otherwise. That's what he put 22 months of his time in with his team with $40 million. What else does he have to add? He better not have anything else to add. It should have been in that report. So any other question that would have went beyond sort of the 4 corners of that report would have been hypothetical questions trying to score political points from the House Democrats. So we're going to get into that because that's probably where we're going to be headed moving forward. Now, he also said if we could have shown that the president did not commit a crime, the report would have stated as such. This was not the case. The president was not exonerated. That's what that's coming out to. I know there's a lot of double negatives in there and all that stuff, but that's just how it was worded. The president was not exonerated. Again, this is nothing new. We knew that the president was not exonerated. Of course, the president and his team want to take out to Twitter and all the other statements anytime they're in front of the media and anytime they're in front of a camera. They want to come out and they want to say that, I'm exonerated. I'm innocent. Nothing to see here. That's not the case. He was bound by the DOJ guideline. that charging the president with a crime was not an option. There is a whole host of things that were written in this report, actions and words that were made by this president and members of his campaign and administration. Some people out there are construing that as an obstruction of justice. Some people may even go further, because that's dealing with volume 2 of the report. Some people even go further and say, well, in volume 1, there were some issues there, and maybe the president did collude or conspire with the Russians. Now, that's going a little bit more out into left field, but nevertheless, that's what we have elections for. You have experts. You put 10 experts in a room, you're going to get 10, 11, 12 different opinions. So we are in a political cycle. We are in the midst of the 2020 presidential campaign. As we have stated here many times before, we had Attorney General Bill Barr testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee and said, you know what, look, it's my opinion, it's my legal analysis in conjunction with the Mueller investigation and with the then Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein that we do not have sufficient evidence to move forward and to indict this president and charge him with obstruction of justice. We have a democratic system here. The people are going to vote in 2020. If they think that this rises to obstruction of justice, if they think this is too much to bear for the President of the United States, then they can vote for somebody else. And that's pretty much where it's left. And it's not going to go much further than that, because the Attorney General is not going to change his mind. Now, politically speaking, what becomes interesting is how the Democrats move forward on this, because it was stated clearly by Bob Mueller, again, nothing new here, that the president was not exonerated. He was bound by DOJ guidelines that the president cannot be charged with a crime because he is a sitting United States president. Okay, and now there's a whole backstory as to why that's precedent, why that's the guideline. We're not going to get into that here. The fact of the matter is, when you turn on the news media, you're going to have the spin doctors on both sides. You're going to have everybody again coming out who are big supporters of Donald Trump saying, look, we told you there's nothing here. He didn't commit a crime, blah, 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 blah. You're going to have people on the left, people who are the anti-Trumpers saying, look, this was a rebuttal to Bill Barr. This is setting up the stage for Congress to start really investigating even more thoroughly, even more aggressively, because obviously Bob Mueller wouldn't have stressed this points because he only talked for 10 minutes, and this is what he wanted to make sure that the American people understood, is that the president was not exonerated. So he couldn't do it legally because of the guidelines from the DOJ, but guess what? Congress can. Congress does have a path. It's called impeachment. Now, will it rise to impeachment becomes the interesting political question, because again, we are in the midst of the 2020 presidential campaign. I honestly believe that Nancy Pelosi and some of the more senior figures on the Democrat side do not want to impeach this president. I think they want to see the process make its way through. I think they want to give their candidates, which of course there's 24 of them out there, a shot. And I don't think they want to try to handicap them or handcuff them with all of this noise and drama that would take place, no question about it, if they were to move forward with impeachment processes, because the president will simply tear them apart, because he will make this all about the impeachment. They won't be able to get away from it. And of course, he thinks that's fine because he's going to play to his base. Look, they're coming after me. I told you this is what they were going to do. This was the whole cult of personality that I said was very, something very scary that you cannot pay attention to. Or I'm sorry, that you do have to pay attention to, because you end up following somebody blindly. But that's exactly what's going to happen. And the president knows that a member of his base are just going to follow him blindly. And so if he can just get out in the news and say, look, they're continuing to investigate me, now they want to impeach Trump, we can't have this. And people, they're just going to eat out of the palm of his hand. Now, I don't think that the Democrats will move forward with impeachment proceedings unless they actually do find something that they just simply cannot ignore if it comes out with the president's financials or any other investigation that they are going to ensue. So that will remain quite interesting. The other thing that I have to remind us all about is the genesis of this entire report. From what we understand at this point, it has to really start kickoff with the Christopher Steele dossier. What we know is that the Hillary Clinton campaign, along with the DNC and their opposition research firm, worked to get Christopher Steele to pretty much draft this dossier. Now, whether or not that was true remains seen, because some people are out there saying, well, Fusion GPS, the opposition research firm, they wrote it, and they just needed a go-between. They just needed Christopher Steele to be the middleman to sign off on it. Well, isn't that interesting? Because if that's true, and Christopher Steele actually did draft some or most of this dossier, well, he claims that he had insiders in Russia. So if that's true, then Christopher Steele colluded and conspired with the Russians with these types of, to get this type of dirt on then candidate Trump, and then gave that information to the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. So by extension, would not have Hillary Clinton, her campaign, and the DNC and Fusion GPS, would they not all be, I guess, guilty of committing collusion or conspiracy with the Russians? I mean, that becomes very interesting, doesn't it? And of course, that's not going to be discussed on NBC, CBS, ABC, and of course, no way in hell, MSNBC. On the flip side, if you just watch Fox News, that's all it is. There are a lot of people, especially the opinion people, and I stress that the opinion people, the commentary, they're going to stress that pretty much that the president was exonerated. They are going to drink the Kool-Aid of the president. I'm innocent. They don't have enough on me to move forward. Blah blah blah. Let's get over it and let's do the deep dive into this whole Genesis. I agree with doing the whole deep dive in the Genesis, because this, in my opinion, was basically a coup staged against this president. I mean, they tried to overthrow and overturn his campaign. They tried to overthrow and overturn his presidency, and they're still in the midst of doing so because the Democrats are not giving up. They are continuing with their investigations. Now, obviously, one of the most important things is it appears from now that Bob Mueller will not be testifying. He, of course, does not want to testify, but again, Congress has the power to subpoena. But it seems that everybody just ignore the subpoena power from Congress. I mean, you tried doing that. It's quite remarkable. So again, this goes back to another political circus. The three-ring circus is alive and well. It's not going away anytime soon. But just be mindful. Look down the middle. Bob Mueller did not refute anything that Attorney General Bill Barr claimed. The president was not exonerated. Bill Barr said as much. Bob Mueller said as much. That's the fact of the matter. They were not going to indict a sitting president because of the DOJ guideline. What Congress does is up to Congress. That's where it stands. So we're just going to have to buckle up, sit tight, and see what happens. This plays into Donald Trump's hand rather well, especially, again, if this economy and or stock market rolls over, because I have to remind you of the State of the Union address where he said the only thing that can really derail this economy and this stock market are continuing investigations, political divisiveness, and endless wars. Well, you can pretty much check all three of those things off with all of the saber rattling in Venezuela and Iran, the continuation in Afghanistan and Syria. Obviously, political divisiveness is front and center every single day. Now you have continuing investigations that are not going away anytime soon. In fact, they might start to pick up now, given that Bob Mueller actually made his statements that he did earlier this morning. And then if you pay attention, obviously, to this podcast, but more specifically to the economic podcast, we talk about how the president is starting to lay the blame potentially at the feet of the Federal Reserve. And now with the escalation in trade talks, now he's also going to blame China. So he basically has 5 avenues that he can blame. And he will probably blame every single one of them because he will not take responsibility if the economy and or stock market turns south. He just won't do it. He'll take credit for all the positive, but he will not take credit for the downfall. He will blame somebody else. So we have to be mindful of all of that. Pay attention. We'll continue to keep you updated. But I am going to end this one a little bit earlier. I will be traveling for the rest of the week. I might be able to catch up with some podcasts over the weekend, but I doubt I will be back on tomorrow, perhaps Friday. But if I can, I will get on this weekend to catch up because I'm sure there's going to be a lot more fallout from this and then a whole bunch of other economic news as well. So have a nice weekend, and I will catch you guys back here next week. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Koritis. Godspeed.